Hello, my name is John Rinker, and today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on MSI Afterburner. What is MSI Afterburner, you might ask? Well, put quite simply, it is a software package that will allow you to overclock your Nvidia graphics cards. If you don't know what overclocking is, then you might want to do a quick Google search on that and take a look into the subject. Basically, it just means speeding up your GPU or graphics processing unit on your graphics card to make it run faster. You'll get a slight performance increase, more frame rates in games, and quicker physics calculations and things like that. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is pull up Google and do a quick search on MSI Afterburner. And the very first link that pops up is going to be the one you want. Now, right here you can download MSI Afterburner, as well as read up on some current news with the program. It is 100% free to download. And you can also download the user's manual, which I highly recommend. Take a look at that. Get a lot of great information out of that. You can also download different skins, go to the forums, and there's a lot of great information there as well. So go ahead and download it and install it. And once you do that, you'll see that this is what the program actually looks like. Now, a little bit about the interface here. It cannot be maximized. This is basically the entire size of the window. It's going to be about this big. You can move it around. You can minimize it, and it'll stay running. So moving on, this right here, it'll display what graphics card you currently have installed. You can see that I have a GeForce GTX 560 Ti. I actually have two of these installed on my machine running in SLI. It'll also display your driver version. And below that, you'll see that you have core voltage and power limit. These are currently disabled. In a second here, we'll take a look at the settings to see how you can enable those. Below that, you have your core clock. Now, this is what we're going to be adjusting to increase the performance of the card. Right now, this is the stock settings that come with the card. So the core clock is set at 822 megahertz. And right below that we have the memory clock, which will also adjust. Currently is set to 2004 megahertz, which again is the stock setting. Below that you actually have a fan speed controller, which you can activate. And if you slide this up, you'll actually increase the speed of your fan. It'll also increase the noise that your graphics card generate, because the fans are quite loud on the Nvidia graphics cards. Right now, there is no fan installed on my cards because I actually have a water cooling loop set up, which is a little more efficient. So you should be able to overclock my graphics cards a little bit higher. And then down here you have different profiles that you can set up. And you can see that I've already set up a couple of profiles here. And basically you just click on them and then click apply, and those settings will take effect. And if you hit reset, it'll go back to the standard, factory settings. So before we get into any of that much further, you can also see that you can actually select one of these profiles and then click apply overclocking at system startup. Now, that's a nice feature because when you start your computer, you already want to have these settings locked in, and you don't want to have to open this up every time and play with these settings before starting up a game. So once you get everything figured out the way you like it, and you make sure that it's stable, if you go ahead and select this, it'll automatically apply whatever profile you have selected. For the time being, we're going to leave that turned off. Now over here on this window, you'll actually see there's a bunch of graphs, and each one of these graphs will give you relative information to your card. It's basically monitoring the system. So right now you can see that GPU 1, that's graphics card 1, has a temperature of 43 degrees Celsius, and graphics card 2, the temperature is actually 41 degrees Celsius. This is a little high for me for idle, but I'm not really going to get into that right now. Actually, I have to do a couple things to my system to take a look at that, and I'll be able to get those temperatures down a little bit more. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're not really going to go into that. As we scroll down, you'll see there's a bunch of graphs here, and you can spend a lot of time looking at this stuff. You have GPU 1 and 2 usage. As you can see right now, they're currently at 0 because we're not running any games or any tests. Below that, you have the fan speed, which incidentally is set to 40, even though there is no fan connected to the card. Below that, we have another fan speed monitor. Keep going down, we have the core clock, which we know from looking over here is actually set to 822, 823, it's relative. Shader clock, we have the memory clock, memory usage, all these great things. So now, as we run tests on the graphics card to see, how it's performing, you're going to see the temperature go up, you're going to see the usage go up, you'll see a lot of these things will actually, change on the fly based on how much work the cards are doing. The nice thing about this is you can actually detach this panel, and you can resize it, make it larger, you can see more of the history. If you go into the settings, you can actually determine a place where you'd like to have a log of this information stored, and you can go back and review it. We'll get into that in a minute. So for the time being, we're just going to close that out, and you'll see it goes right back into being docked onto this main window. So there's the interface. Pretty easy to understand. If you click this little information button here, you'll actually get a more thorough description of the graphics cards that you have installed, the driver version, some of this other information here. I'm not really sure what it is, but it's helpful if you need to find that information. Another nice thing about this interface and the program as a whole is that you'll see if you hover over any one of these toggles, you'll get a description of what it does. As you can see here, the power limit, adjust master GPU power limit if it is supported by a graphics card. We'll also give you hints as to what this is useful for, pitfalls that you might run into, things that you might want to avoid. For instance, if you hover over the core voltage, it'll tell you that it's quite dangerous. Actually, let me move this down so you can see it. Voltage control is locked by default due to safety reasons. If you understand and accept the risks of using voltage control, you can unlock it in advanced application properties. So yeah, it'll definitely warn you if there's something you're getting ready to change. If you just hover over it, it'll give you hints, and it'll tell you the risks involved. With any kind of overclocking, there are certain risks involved. The greatest one of those being that you could completely destroy your graphics card. So one of the things you definitely want to do is spend some time, take a look at this program, definitely go into the settings, which we're going to do here in a minute, and read the little pop-ups that come with this. Spend some time looking at the user's manual, maybe go on the forums, because it can be a little nerve-wracking, and it can be dangerous. Graphics cards are not cheap these days, and when you start playing around with these settings, there is a risk that you could permanently damage the graphics card. Okay, so that's enough of a warning. We're gonna continue on. This button right here, if I hover over this, you'll see that this is hold on a second. If I hover over this, you'll see that this is actually a link to a program called Combustor, which actually downloads with this software package. that's really helpful for determining the stability and the performance increase of your graphics cards, and we'll get into that later. But for now, just know that this is a basically a quick launch that you can go right into a setting and test the changes that you've made. Alright, so down here, we have our profile settings that you can save. We have the reset button, which will take you back to the factory settings. And then we have the settings that you can go into. And we'll take a look at some of these. On the General tab, you can see that you can select which graphics card you want to be the master graphics card. I don't think this really makes much of a difference. If you're using SLI, then you probably have two of the exact same graphics cards, so you can just pick whichever one. Synchronized settings for similar graphics cards, you definitely want this enabled. And again, like all the other buttons, if you hover over each one of these, it'll tell you a little bit of information about it. There's some basic properties here. Start with Windows, start minimized, enable low-level hardware access interface, unlock voltage control. So this is where we would actually unlock the ability to increase the voltage to the card, which is one of the more dangerous things that you can do. Also, it's important if you want to get more performance out of your card. So, again, this is inherently kind of a dangerous thing that you're, doing when you're overclocking anything. As far as, the potential to harm the instruments. So again, you can go through these. You have the fan control properties, the monitoring. Say you don't want so many graphs, you can come through here and deselect ones that you don't want, and turn on ones that you actually would like to know about. You can set up a log history file. I was talking about that before. You can set up a size for that file, so once it reaches a certain size, it'll stop recording. You can actually, these things I'm not going to go into. You have a couple different profiles that you can set up. User interface, you can actually select different skins. You can download new skins. There's a lot of customization options here. For now, I'm going to leave everything as default. You can actually turn off the user interface tooltips and the hints. I'm going to leave those on for this tutorial. Alright, so let's take a look at what we got going on here. So these are my settings. This comes, from the factory. If you don't change anything, this is what the card is going to be set at for the core clock and for the memory clock. So just make sure we're there. Alright. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to get a baseline for what kind of performance we're getting out of the two cards running an SLI with the standard settings. And to do that, we're actually going to run another program that comes with it called Combustor. Combustor is also made by MSI. You can actually open it up, and you'll see that it is a fully functioning separate software package. There's a couple different settings in here. Again, it'll give you a little bit of a readout, what kind of cards you have, the temperature that you're currently at, all that stuff. You can run different tests here. Right here for this GPU burn-in, this is going to be the one that runs when we test it through Afterburner. So these are the settings we're going to play around with. You have OpenGL 2, 3, DirectX 9, 10, and 11. We're going to leave it on 11. PostFX, we'll leave that off. 3D object, there's a couple different neat objects that they have here. We'll do the sphere just for this one. Here's a couple different benchmarking tools that you can use separate of Afterburner, and this X score and P score. These will actually run for a specific amount of time and then give you a score based on all of the settings that you have and what kind of results you achieved, as far as frames per second, what temperature, and how many physics calculations you were able to perform. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, and I'm not going to go into this too heavy. You can change some of the settings over here. We'll keep this on. We'll leave this at this right here, this resolution. So these are the settings that we want. We'll go ahead and close out of that. Now, in order to get a baseline, we're just going to run this for a couple of seconds, and we'll kind of just make a mental note of what we get here. So we'll go ahead and click the combustor window, and you'll see if I can get this centered. Alright, so this is combustor running. Up here in the top corner here, you can see that we're running Direct3D 11 or DirectX 11. You can see the screen resolution. All this stuff. It'll give you a listing of the card that you have. Right here you can see frames per second. We're reaching 130. It'll give you a minimum, maximum, and the thing we're most concerned about is you're going to have an average. So we're getting an average of 128 to 129 frames per second. It's basically just churning through frames of this, and this is a very graphic intensive object that we're simulating here through this program. The nice thing is you can see the GPU load. You can see right now it's maxing out the load on both graphics cards, so making it work as hard as possible. And you can monitor the temperature. So as you can see before, when we were at idle, both cards were hovering around 40, 41. Now all of a sudden we started to climb up there in temperature a little bit. We're hitting 53 and 47 on both of the cards. Over here on the right hand side, you can see the type of graphics card. You can see the core clock speed. You can see the memory speed for both cards individually. And we could just let this run indefinitely to test for stability and see what kind of frame rate average we're getting. One of the important things that you want to look for while you're doing this is you want to keep an eye out for artifacting. And artifacting is basically, there'll be a small patch that will appear only for a second, but you might see something that doesn't look right. Right now this whole thing looks kind of uniform. We're getting a very detailed, crisp image in the center, and it's getting fuzzy because it's using some ocular tricks to make it look like we're focused in on one point. I believe it's called focal blur. And so anyway, you'll see, for artifacting, you'll see some things appear that just don't look to render right. Little gray patches or something that look like that. You might see lines, on the screen. You might see tearing of an object. You just want to run this for a while and take a look at it and make sure that it looks okay and it's stable. So, the temperature is starting to climb up a little bit. Not too bad. I'm not worried about 56 degrees. That's not bad for my system. Again, as we do this, over and over, you're going to see that the temperatures will get a lot higher than that. I'm not particularly happy with some of the temperatures I was getting while running this. But, there are some things that I need to go in and tweak on my system, and that's hardware related, not, software related. So, it is what it is. You're likely to get, better temperatures than this, if you're running this, even with air cooled, if you have a really nice air cooler on the graphics card, or, if you have a water cooled system, your graphics card might run a lot cooler. A water cooled system, typically, has better performance as far as heat, but there's no guarantee. You might have a really hot room and all that stuff. So, enough talking about all this crap. We're just going to try to remember the average frame rate here is around 129. So we'll go and close out of that. Now, the one thing you want to do, and it takes a little bit of patience, and I might decide to edit this part of the video out. You actually have to let the temperature come back down a little bit. Now, depending on how hot the card got, what kind of cooling you have, how hot the air in the room is. If you have a small room, you know, and you're blowing a lot of hot air out of your computer, it's not uncommon for your computer to actually heat the room that you're in, which can make it hard to get back down to the same temperatures that you started at. For instance, when I first started my computer and ran this program, the graphics cards were actually idling a lot cooler. They were around 33, 34 degrees. As the space starts to heat up and the air around the computer starts to heat up and the cards get going and you test them out a couple of times, you know, you'll see that baseline zero load temperature start to creep up there a little bit, you know, and it might be time to just let your system sit for a minute, you know, let the temperatures come down a little bit. You know, probably give it a couple of minutes. I'm not going to waste too much time on that, you know, for the sake of keeping this video short. You know, just let this cool down a little bit, and then we're going to jump right in. So, one of the most important things to remember when you're overclocking anything, graphics card or, you know, a CPU, or, you know, a mouse, as people do overclock their mice. It sounds ridiculous, but they do. Is that you want to go in small steps. So, you know, and then you want to test it. So you don't want to just take this slider and just ram it all the way up to max and say, oh yeah, you know, let's see what that looks like, because you will fry your graphics cards. Okay. It's really easy to just want to jack this thing up there and have it, you know, pump out, you know, awesome frame rates and, you know, brag about it and get really good scores and upload them online. You know, just, you know, save it and just be conservative for this small little part. You know, ounce of prevention goes a long way here. And the best way to do that is to be conservative. Set a standard mark, maybe 5 megahertz, and go up by that increment every time. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take this slider and we're going to move it up by 5 megahertz. So we're going to go up to, and this can be a little tricky. If you hover over this and hit the arrow keys, you can actually get it exactly where you want it. So that would be 5 megahertz higher. And then the same thing for the memory clock. You know, what we're going to do is we're going to leave this alone at first. And once we get this up somewhere, you know, that we feel comfortable with, then we'll come back down here and repeat the process. So yeah, so we've increased this by 5 megahertz. Probably won't see much of a difference. But, you know, better safe than sorry. So we'll go slow. So we've got that set. Now, the thing you need to do is after you adjust this, it doesn't go into effect immediately. So you have to come down here and you have to hit apply. So once you hit apply and it's grayed out, then you know that this has been taken into effect. And I'll show you in a second how you can, you know, verify that, you know, your card is actually overclocked. So once you hit apply and you're looking at it, you can give yourself a big pat on the back and say, I just overclocked my graphics cards. It's pretty simple. Alright, so now, you know, what we're going to do after we've gotten that baseline and we've made a slight increase to the core clock here, we're going to, you guessed it, run Combustor again. So here it comes, and we'll actually try to get this centered. And we'll just sit here and watch this for about a minute. We'll see what kind of temperatures we get. And we'll see what kind of frame rates we get. So you can see now, you know, this is jumping around a good bit. And it should average out over time. You know, 128, 129, it's about the same. You know, they haven't really gotten much of an increase off of this. Temperatures getting a little bit higher. You'll see if you run this for an hour, you know, it might get up to 60 at these settings. You know, your card will be different. You know, even if you have the exact same card that I have, your temperatures might be different depending on, you know, room temperature and cooling and all that stuff. So, you know, these are just settings that are specific to my machine. You know, and you're gonna find that, you know, going through and doing this, you're gonna recognize, you know, what kind of temperatures are appropriate for where you're at and for your machine. The highest temperature that you want to try to stay away from is, I would say, around 85, 90-ish. It's okay to get up to that temperature. Graphics cards do tend to run a little hotter than CPUs. However, when you get up to those temperatures, you are risking damage. And one of the things that the Nvidia chipset has built into it is actually fail-safe measures. So when you get up to those high temperatures, it'll actually power itself down in order to try to save its own life. So a lot of people refer to that as a crash. You will actually see, your screen go black for a couple of seconds. It may crash your whole system. It may just come up with a warning that says, your graphics card has, crashed and recovered. It'll give you a bunch of strange things will happen. It's not good. You want to try to stay away from that. Best thing to do, play around with this, see what kind of temperatures you're getting. Try to stay away from the really high ones, especially like the 90s. It's not uncommon for my graphics cards to get up to the 70s or 80s sometimes when I'm playing games. So, that's not good. But, you're not really risking damaging the card. You're probably shortening the life of the card a little bit, but, you're not going to damage it at that temperature. So you can see we're getting up to 60, 61 here. That's it's around average. We keep running this. It'll keep getting hotter and hotter. Frame rate, yeah, still averaging out 129. So that little increase, that we did, so you can see now it is in fact 826. Should be 827, but it's kind of relative to the machine and the software what it's reading. But you can see we did have that increase here, and we are in fact running the cards in an overclock state for this simulation. And we'll go ahead and close out of this. So now we're going to do it again. Hover over this and use your arrow keys. We have to click it, and we'll go up another 5. Hit apply. And we're going to wait for the graphics cards to cool down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and let it do that. Again, the reason I'm pausing the video to let these cool down every time, obviously if you're running a game, you're not going to be pausing your game and exiting out to let your graphics cards cool down, obviously. So, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to see what temperature we're going from when it's zero load and the temperatures are at an idle state versus slamming it into this and seeing what kind of temperatures we're reaching. Because once you get up to a certain point, your graphics cards will slowly increase over time. The longer you play, but they will pretty much find a plateau. So I'm just trying to give ourselves some room to be able to reach that plateau and see what it is by letting these cool down. If we start off in a hot state already, then it'll just slowly, increase over that time. So we're trying to let them cool down a little bit to give ourselves some room to run the simulation and get the frame rates and all that. So again, I'm going to go ahead and actually I think we're okay. We don't have to pause it. We'll stay with what we have here. All right. So we have our settings applied, and we'll go ahead and run Combustor again. And you can see the temperatures jump up there pretty quick. And if you look over here, you'll see now the core clock says 832 megahertz. And you can see the frame rates averaging 128. And probably jump up there to 129 here soon and stay there for the average. Now the frame rate will also may vary on your system depending on what settings you have set in your Nvidia graphics profile. If you right click on your desktop, you can go in there and change a lot of the global settings, change settings for different applications. All of that will affect this stuff. There's a lot of settings there. I'm not going to go into what all of them mean. There's a lot of documentation that you can look at online. Nvidia forums is a great place to go to figure all that stuff out. But that will have an effect. Your frame rates are likely to be different. It could be 50, it could be 180. This stuff can vary wildly even depending on your monitor that you have connected to your computer. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a baseline for our system. So all of these things are relative to for this application, for my system personally. When you run it on your own system, you're going to want to look at what your baseline is, and you're going to monitor that as you step the card up, and see what kind of performance increase you're getting. All right, so this looks pretty stable. I mean, we could run this for a long time. I mean, I've done this a few times, so I know that this is, this isn't bad. Where we're at right now, it's running relatively about the same. This might tick up to 130 here in a couple of seconds. But, I feel okay with where we're at here, so we're going to go ahead and close this out. And again, rinse and repeat. We keep basically doing this process over and over. Stepping up the core clock and seeing what kind of temperatures we get, seeing what kind of frame rates we get, all that good stuff. So now I think I am going to pause the video just for a second to let these graphics cards cool down a little bit. Okay, and we're back, and you can see, yeah, they haven't cooled off that much, but that's okay. We're gonna forge ahead, as they say. So again, we're gonna move this up by another 5 increment. So we'll go to 837, hit apply. And, as you can see, this kind of does get a little monotonous, trying to squeeze the tiniest little bit of performance out of these cards. Alright, so, this should start looking familiar. You can see here we have a minimum of 118 now. So, this one might actually stay at 128, 127. Basically, as you can see here, we've made kind of a significant increase at this point, to the megahertz. Not a huge increase, but a significant one. We've gone up by 15 megahertz, and you can see the CPU temperatures are now around 61 and 52. So the temperature that it jumps up to initially is a little bit higher. That may be due to the fact that the cards are a little hotter from the start, but all in all, not really much has changed, So one of the things that, I'd like to mention at this point is that, the performance increase that you're going to see from this is not going to be that drastic. I mean, we will see an increase, I guarantee you, we will see that average, go higher eventually by the end of all of this, but, it's one of those things where you're not going to buy a GTX 560 Ti card and magically turn it into a 580 card by doing this. It's not going to happen. This is for people who like to tinker around with things and try to squeeze every little bit of performance and efficiency out of everything that they own. That's basically it. You might get a couple extra frame rates, per second, in a game that you like. Is it noticeable while you're playing? I'd like to think so. Some people will argue that it really doesn't make that much of a difference, and it's not really worth going into doing all of this. Now these cards that I have, the GTX 560 Ti, probably not the best cards for overclocking. They don't have a tremendous amount of upside, but there's not a lot of cards that do. Depending on your system, you might be able to squeeze a lot more out of these cards than I can. But yeah, it's something you do for the thrill of it, and because you like to tinker with things and try to make them work that much better, even if it is just a minimal amount. So keep that in mind. If you watching this video and you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm gonna get this card for $200 and I'm gonna turn it into this $500 card. I mean, that's it's not gonna happen. You can give up on that pipe dream right now. Sorry to burst your bubble. All right, so that looks stable, and at this point I'm gonna keep doing this over and over, and we'll see in a minute or two here where we kind of top out at. again, I'd like to mention that while this is running, it is important to stay here and watch what's going on. Um, like I said, you want to be looking for artifacts in the render. You want to be monitoring the temperatures. It is a kind of a time-consuming thing for impatient people like myself. But it is important to stay here. You don't just run it and walk away. You didn't need to kind of sit here and watch this. There's a lot of stuff to be looking for and to be monitoring. So, having said that, I think we're going to go up by another 5, and then to just belabor the point of keeping these increments small. Not seeing too much of a performance increase so far, but you'll see once we move on to the memory clock that we will get a nice little performance increase from that, and hopefully we'll cause a crash and everyone can laugh. And again, a good thing to do while you're running this is set a nice benchmarking time limit, so you can see that from here the elapsed time is 1 minute and 20 seconds so far that we've been running this particular test. Something good to shoot for would maybe be 10 minutes, while you're doing this, just to check for stability, because as this goes on, the temperatures get a little warmer. You'll start seeing some artifacting maybe. You want to run it for a little while. I'm kind of not running it for very long because I'm recording a video, but this is something that you want to do for a while to test the stability of the card. Alright, so for the sake of this video, we're going to leave the core clock at 847, which is a pretty good increase. 22 to 822 to 847 is a pretty good increase on the core clock. Haven't seen any frame rate adjustments, performance increase on that end of the spectrum. So you'll see that, more so when we get into the memory clock. And we'll start to take a look at that here in another minute or two. I'm actually going to pause the video now and let the cards cool down a little bit before we run this next part, so I'll see you in a second. So we're back, and as you can see, my cards have cooled down a little bit. For you water cooling enthusiasts out there, which may be screaming at the top of your lungs at this point in this video, I just want to let you know that I do in fact have a decent amount of air bubbles circulating through my loop, which I need to get out of there. They are hurting the performance of my cards a little bit as far as temperatures go, but for the sake of this video, we're going to press on anyway. So we have, the temperatures have come down a decent amount. They're at 45 and 48. And now, did have these set. Actually saved my last settings as a profile. Alright, so we left off, we were at 847 for the core clock, and now we're going to start adjusting the memory clock. So we'll go ahead and click on that, and again we're going to go up by increments of 5. So we'll go to 2009, hit apply, and run combustor. And again, we're not really seeing too much of a change. At this point, you may be wondering, why am I even doing this? We will see a performance increase, I promise. We haven't seen it yet, but it is coming. These are changes that need to be made slowly. Honestly, we could have taken the core clock up a decent amount higher than this, and the memory clock we can take up a good amount too. For the sake of this video, I know it's starting to get pretty long. I don't know if we're going to go through all of the steps, but we'll see where we end up, and what kind of performance increase we get. So yeah, we're watching the temperature, we're watching the render here to make sure there's no artifacting. We're looking at the average frame rate, all of these things that we've been doing for a while here. It's very monotonous, very repetitive process. Same goes for any kind of overclocking. If you want to do it right, you want to do it safe, you want to go by small increments and just test the heck out of it at every step, you know. If this is your first foray into overclocking, it is a very deep and very intricate subject. There's a lot of great free information out there on the web. Um, you know, overclocking CPU is a lot more involved than this process. This is kind of like overclocking light. It's a nice way if you have a good setup to get into overclocking and see if it's something that you are interested in trying on a CPU. Overclocking a CPU, you will get a lot more benefit from. You will actually see tangible results, things that'll be, quite drastic. There's a lot more upside to overclocking a CPU than there is a GPU. So having said that, we'll go ahead and stop that. It looks pretty good. And we'll go ahead and go up by our 5 increments. So we were at 9, so we'll go to 14. Hit apply. And as I do this, I think I might turn the microphone off and just, kind of watch this along with you. Maybe put it into fast forward, to see where we end up with the memory clock. Went through the steps and increased the memory clock and the core clock in intervals all the way up to the levels they're currently at now, which is 894 and 2104. And we'll go ahead and run combustor so you guys can see what kind of a performance increase we got out of this. Okay, so as you can see, we're now hitting an average of 135 frames per second. Whereas before we were getting an average frame rate of about 129 frames per second. Now, some of you may be wondering, is this really worth it? If we're running at 129 frames per second, that's already way faster than the human eye can perceive. And if we increase that to 135 frames per second, it's not going to make a difference. Well, that's not exactly true when you're gaming. You see, the frames per second is generally locked at that for games, but one of the problems you'll run into is that games will actually experience lag when they're going through very intensive parts of a game. So there's a lot of graphic elements or a lot of interactions with some kind of physics being calculated. And I'm not going to get into all the technical jargon, but one of the things that'll happen is that you might have 60 frames per second, but in that second you'll have 30 frames that come out exactly at the right intervals, and then you'll have 10 frames that will come out very close to each other, and then you have 20 frames that are maybe spread out in a longer period than they should be. Even though it equals out to 60 frames per second as an average, you might have half a second or even a second where you only get maybe 10, 15 frames. So if you can increase the frame rate to 5 or 6 extra frames, they can help fill in those gaps that you'll experience when you're gaming, especially with graphics intensive games, so that when you do have those spikes and valleys in frame rate, they can be less noticeable and make the game look more smooth. So that's kind of the whole reason for trying to get the highest frame rate possible. Isn't so much because I think we see at 15 frames per second And even though they say 30 to 60 frames is almost imperceivable difference in the eye, I kind of do notice when when you're watching it because of that, because of those frames that are can be spread out. You do notice a smoother gameplay the higher the frame rate, especially when you get a like the difference between like 60 frames per second to 120 frames per second. Now you have to have a monitor that'll support that also. The monitor that I use is actually supports stereo 3D used with the Nvidia 3D glasses, so I can fully support 120 frames, in game for any game that I play. And it does make a big difference. You can tell a huge difference when it's running at full potential and you're getting all those frames. So that's something to be mindful of. Now you can see the temperatures that we're reaching here: 66 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Celsius, a little higher now, than it was before. Again, you can see the memory is up there quite a bit in the core. 894, 2106. These are a lot higher than what the stock values were. We're really not tapping into a lot of the potential of this card. We could go a lot higher. In order to do that, we'd have to increase the voltage to make sure that the card is stable. I believe I did have a setting on there, a preset profile saved at around 930 core clock and a memory of 2145, I believe, somewhere around there. And it actually was crashing my card. So one of the things that you would have to do in that situation is, I'll go ahead and close out of this. You would have to go into settings, and then you would have to unlock voltage control and unlock voltage monitoring and hit OK. And you'll have to restart Afterburner as well. There we go. And you can see now you can change the core voltage. I'm not going to get into this in this video tutorial. For now, I think you can see kind of the process of how you go about overclocking your graphics cards. I may do a video tutorial later for extreme overclocking. Will actually increase the voltage. Some graphics cards that you get, I was actually looking at some forums in between recording some of this video, and some cards that you get from a factory, depending on the manufacturer. There's a lot of different manufacturers out there. There's PNY, MSI actually makes Nvidia graphics cards, Gigabyte. There's others. But some of the cards, when you get them, they actually have some of their own utilities that you'll be able to download that are specific for that manufacturer's type of card. So it might be a GTX 560 Ti, but since it's manufactured by that particular company, they might have their own software package that you can download to support it. And one of the things I saw on there was that some of the cards actually are more stable if you take the factory settings and just increase the voltage a little bit, so that the card actually has more power to be able to run, because a lot of them, they'll actually overclock the card as a standard. So when you get it and you open it up, the core clock might be set to something like 920, and it might have a big twin fan cooler and special heat sink and everything built onto the card when you buy it, so that it can be overclocked from the factory and then shipped out. And generally I try to stay away from those. I like to do my own overclocks on graphics cards. It's just my nature. Like I said, I like to go in and tinker with things and play around with it. But yeah, that's something to look out for also, that you can actually use this utility here to increase voltage to make it more stable if you have a factory overclocked card. Again, in closing, I want to say that the performance increase, not anything incredible. We could push this farther, but for this video we're going to stop it here. So take care. If you do want to do this yourself, make sure you read lots about it. There's lots of blogs out there. Nvidia, MSI, all the card manufacturers, they all have forums that you can go on and post questions or read other people's questions, and see if this is something that you want to get into, because, I mean, for me, I think it's kind of cool, that you can go in and change a lot of these settings and get, tangible results. Even though the results aren't going to be that spectacular, they're still results, and they can make a difference depending on what kind of games you're into. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching this video. Like, subscribe, whatever. Have a nice day.